6:03, we'll call the meeting to order, and we'll introduce Joel DeStasio from Trout Unlimited. Joel, have you met everybody on the board here?
Not everybody, no.
Okay. Wayne Sylvester from Three Ponds Protective Association. Steve Panish, I don't know, you've
Yeah,
met
absolutely.
Steve. Yeah, me. And Jeff Leclerc is an alternate, but he's serving tonight because we just had a resignation from the board.
Right.
And he's a great alternate. And you just met Bob.
Yep.
And Sharon Buttrick is also an alternate. And, okay, so we don't have any members of the public, but you're gonna give us a synopsis of the project and then take questions, as I understand it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So just to reintroduce myself, I am Joel DeStasio with Trout Unlimited New Hampshire. I've been with the company about 9 years. Took over as project coordinator for the former coordinator Colin Lawson back in June. The project that I'm here to speak specifically about tonight would be the Sam Plummer Road tributary to Lyman Brook project, culvert replacement project that is. This was a project that was initially initiated, a little redundant. It was initiated 2018. We were doing outreach workshops within the Salmon Falls drainage between New Durham, Middleton, Milton, and one of them, Farmington. The goal of those workshops was to identify hydraulically vulnerable crossings and also crossings that create aquatic organism passage barriers, basically fish unable to pass through these road stream crossing structures to the upstream headwaters. When we went through that process of identifying crossings in the town of Milton, the one that we settled on was the one on Sam Plummer Road. And again, that's a tributary to Lyman Brook. So the goal of that project ultimately is to just get it replaced. The existing structure is collapsed and dilapidated. It's very hydraulically vulnerable. We ran an analysis of it, and I would say around the 2 to the 5 year storm event, you're gonna see that crossing overtopping. To couple on that, when you speak with the local landowners that live on that roadway, you do hear reports of during large storm events, there is some backwater and overtopping of that roadway. So in a situation like that, it's obviously bad for the town's infrastructure for emergency passage, residential access, et cetera, but also for me, I wear my Trout Unlimited hat, and my primary concern ecologically is the aquatic barrier, the barrier for fish passage moving through. A lot of projects that we do culvert replacements on, they benefit both sides of that. Both sides, the protecting the infrastructure, replacing the undersized structure with a appropriately sized structure based on Army Corps of Engineers as well as New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services rules and regulations for road stream crossing replacements. For the Sam Plummer Road project, currently, again, it started in 2018, started small, we've been spooling up. We initially got a aquatic resource mitigation fund grant through the Department of Environmental Services back in 2019, I believe is when it was officially struck. 2020 came, obviously we all had to put things on hold, and then moving forward into 2021, the previous year, we were hoping to get it constructed, but because of budgetary issues, we had to put it on pause. In between then and now, we've had great success with securing the remaining required budget for construction. So we're ready to go in that regard. The final designs have been completed by our Trout Unlimited engineers. They've been reviewed by the Department of Environmental Services. Because this is an aquatic resource mitigation funded project, which is a DES funding program. They pay a little bit closer attention to the application process and make sure that the design plans are in conform to, again, rules and regulations. So we've gone through those reviews with DES. I shared with Virginia, who I believe shared with all of you, the draft permit application that we will be submitting to the Department of Environmental Services for the project. So we're definitely moving in the right direction in that regard. Our permit application is ready for delivery. Our funding has finally been secured. At this point, we need to communicate with the Town of Milton DPW. I've been in touch with Pat Smith. And we're going to figure out moving forward for the construction side of things. Ultimately, at this point, we need to put the project out to bid for contractors to place bids on for the project to do the construction. We'll be doing that moving into the later winter, early spring, and then the plan would be for construction to take place during summer 2023. And when it's all said and done, we'll have a appropriately sized road stream crossing at that location, which facilitates both hydraulic continuity throughout that stream channel. There won't be any flooding risks. It's worth mentioning all of the road stream crossing replacements that our engineers design are built to withstand the 100-year storm event. So all of the road streams, crossings that we work on, all these culverts that we replace, the goal is to be mindful of the changes in our climate and the larger rain events that we're experiencing, and to have these crossings not be vulnerable moving forward with the anticipated greater amounts of flows. When we design these crossings, the idea is during that 100-year storm event, when the flood stage is at, not their highest, but very high, that you'll still have what we refer to as freeboard headspace, basically, between the top of that water surface and the bottom of the deck of that bridge. So even during those 100-year storm events, we're still looking to maintain at least 1 foot minimum clearance between the top of the surface of that stage of water as well as the bottom of the structure itself. For these road stream crossing replacement projects, we're not only replacing the undersized crossing itself, but we're also rebuilding the stream channel to match the natural stream both up and downstream of the crossing itself. This is based off of a methodology that was originally developed by the U.S. Forest Service. So basically, when we go in, we replace this structure with an appropriately sized structure. We also rebuild that stream channel to, again, match the up and downstream slopes, bankful widths, stream bed substrate size, and again, that's just for the sake of continuity throughout that entire structure. Another part of the stream simulation method is to, for the sake of maintaining the appropriate grade slope of that stream channel, we install rock veins, also referred to as grade controls, and again, the purpose of those is to maintain the slope of that stream bed throughout the project area. The last thing that we want to see, it's not even on our list of things we'd like to see, would be after replacing that structure, the hydraulic just action scouring out that stream bed material, basically and sizing that channel. We're not looking for that to happen, so to maintain that grade, a part of the stream simulation method is to install grade controls, maintain stream slope, appropriately sized stream bed substrate. So we do pebble counts, find out what the right size, grain size is for that stream system, and just duplicate that. So ultimately, it's DES, the Department of Environmental Services, as well as Army Corps of Engineers, but mostly DES. When it comes to road stream crossings, they have 3 parameters that they're looking to assess and potentially correct. The first one is aquatic organism passage, which I've already mentioned, and that's whether or not the current structure prevents a barrier to fish passage upstream or downstream for that matter. The second component is hydraulic vulnerability. That's the flood potential. So is that crossing appropriately sized to pass all of those certain, your 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, up. How much water can that actually convey before it becomes backwatered, vulnerable, and potentially blows out of the roadway? And then the third parameter is geomorphic compatibility. It's just a fancy term basically for does it match the natural stream shape. If the stream upstream is 10 to 15 feet, or say 15 feet, and downstream it's about 15 feet, you want to have your open space, your open bankful width through that structure, the new structure, to match those. So that would be your geomorphic compatibility aspect. And again, all of our designs conform to all of those standards. We're looking to go in, not put Band-Aids on these. We want to put in the correct size structure, so in perpetuity, that crossing can be confidently expected to pass storm flows, and especially during large storm events where emergency service vehicles are going to potentially need access to these smaller communities. You can feel a lot better knowing that those structures are going to stand the storms and be usable, as opposed to washing away and then becoming a large problem.
So when you improve, I assume in general, you're making it wider.
Correct.
I mean, for anyone, and
Usually,
definitely
yeah.
for this one.
Yeah.
Which means there's less blockage. Does that mean that there's going to be more water through, and will people downstream see a change in the amount of water?
Not too much. If the stream channel, if the crossing is properly conveying, effectively, an appropriate crossing would have no impact on stream flow. It wouldn't back it up, it wouldn't speed it up. It would just be as though that structure was never there, and that stream channel is natural from its bed to its banks.
But I mean, compared to the existing one, which is blocking it.
It could potentially, if that crossing is currently behaving as some type of check in the system, like a weir kind of holding back water during those high flow events.
Right.
There could be an anticipated increase in downstream flow during storm events. Again, it would be going back to the natural state of the stream, so
Right.
whatever flow would move downstream, you could consider it as the natural flow as opposed
Yeah.
to something with a semi-barrier, like a dam upstream or something like that.
Do you know if that's true in this case? If it,
In this
has it-
particular case, I'm not sure, to be honest. I know that we got about the upstream section of Lyman, or excuse me, the tributary to Lyman Brook. You're looking at about 1.2 miles going upstream maximum. We actually walked it a few years
Right.
ago. It's a smaller drainage area, so the amount of water that is being captured in that spot and then conveying to the point of Sam Plummer Road, it's not huge, but it's still significant enough. I do believe downstream of the crossing on Sam Plummer Road, there's a wetland. So that's
Yeah.
if there was an increase in flows downstream, it's always good to have a wetland can act as a buffer to absorb
Right,
those greater
right.
flows, as opposed to say it was like a residential community where you could
Right.
end up potentially flooding out somebody's backyard.
Yeah,
Again, this is a smaller crossing with smaller overall discharge rates, flows during high, storm events, just big flow events. So there's not too much water conveying through there comparative to other, larger crossings.
right.
But, yeah, I would have to say the potential would exist for a new normal, if the stream went back to its appropriate
Right.
size.
Right.
You could anticipate, as opposed to that crossing backing up the water and kind of just trickling it out over time.
Right.
Yeah, you could see potentially increased flows.
So other questions people, I assuming you were,
Yeah.
you had finished your summary, I was
absolutely.
thinking.
Yep.
You talked about fish
Sure.
passage. Have you
Yep.
done an assessment of fish populations at all?
So fish populations in that local area, there have John McGee of New Hampshire Fish and Game, he's the fisheries biologist, one of the fisheries biologists. They have done some electrofishing, population surveys, not on the tributary itself, but downstream of the tributary on the main system of Lyman Brook. It's a little bit warmer water of a system, so brook trout have not been identified there, but there are other local warm water species, like black-nosed dace, for instance. So when we replace, again, I'm Trout Unlimited, so our priority is eastern brook trout. That's our focus species amongst the other brook trout species locally here in New Hampshire. That being said, any aquatic organism passage reconnection type project is going to benefit all aquatic life, all species of fish, and then beyond, amphibians as well. On this particular location, there's a few different types of salamanders that are local to the area, and Fish and Game has indicated this type of a project, this specific project, the Sam Plummer Road crossing replacement, would be beneficial to those types of species as well. So it's not just fish per se, but it's any type of aquatic life that's fully aquatic or semi-aquatic, like turtles, as opposed to having a collapsed structure where semi-terrestrial, again, like turtles would have to go up and over. In this case, when that stream channels at its proper width and there's a normal natural stream bed on the bottom and it's not a barrier anymore, they can utilize that passage just as well as a fish could. So all species, but in general, Lyman Brook and its tributary, which we're working on, is a little bit warmer water of a system, and brook trout, to date, to my knowledge, have not been identified in this.
Although the neighbors did say they used to have brook trout there.
They did, yep, absolutely. So, and the hope is, and the overarching hope is, okay, maybe there's not a native brook trout population currently present at that location. A big part of that is that's a barrier on the roadway. Maybe brook trout, just because by virtue of the fact that they do not have access to those headwaters, that 1.2 miles upstream, they basically just vacate the area and look for greener pastures. If we reintroduce passage at this location, there is a potential, there is a chance that brook trout can find their way back into this system, up into the upper headwaters where it's a little bit cooler, good spawning habitat, etc. And over time, you could see a natural reintroduction. The possibility absolutely exists in this case.
That was my question, what Bob just asked 2 years ago, I think.
Mhm.
All right, was, are there brook trout there? Would Fish and Game ever consider going and stalking, all right, downstream to
That's-
see whether or not they would go upstream?
Perhaps. Fish and Game, I'll be honest with you, I worked very closely with Fish and Game for a long time and a lot of their fisheries biologists. Great team of people to work with. With regard to the stalking side, the stalking component of Fish and Game, You can always give suggestions. They're always willing to listen to the public. Whether or not they're going to be upfront with their stocking location, sometimes they like to play those cards a little close to their chest. You can make the suggestions, you know, but whether or not they would follow, I don't know, it sounds like the wrong term, whether or not they would choose to stock that location or advertise that it's stocked, et cetera, where precisely, could go either way. But the idea of restocking it, could absolutely be introduced to them, and if a case, you know, I would assume that if a strong enough case was made, it would be taken into consideration.
But it's still possible there could still be brook trout.
Absolutely, absolutely, and like I said, the hope is that over time, you know, you'll have your wandering brook trout down in the larger systems, and during the summer months, when those larger systems start to get, you know, just thermal exposure, start to warm up, these fish are gonna be looking for those smaller systems, the upstream systems, for refuge. And then later in the season, as you move into fall, for spawning purposes. So, in their ventures, could they make their way up to the San Plummer Road crossing and realize, hey, the barrier that was there last year ain't there this year, and they're gonna move on up in, and then the greatest hope would be over time potentially establish a native population in that area, where you know, frankly, they didn't even have a chance to begin with previously because they just simply did not have access to those headwaters. Now that we give them the opportunity to gain access to those headwaters, the hope is that they could potentially move in.
And the headwaters are now in conserved property.
And that's the best part, which, thank you for bringing that up, I did not even touch on that aspect of the acquisition of the former Cheney lot on the
Right.
upstream side of the crossing is now held, you know, in conservation, you know, in perpetuity. So we know that property upstream, the entirety of that drainage upstream of the headwaters is now held in conservation, and we can rest assured there won't be any development or anything. So that just amplifies the habitability long-term over that, you know, small drainage. And as, you know, we keep seeing these changes in our climate and increasing temperatures, which translates to increasing water temperatures, these fish are absolutely going to be looking for strongholds. And right now for Trout Unlimited, that's a very large priority of what we refer to as our Priority Waters Initiative, is each state that Trout Unlimited is in, we're identifying these areas that can be considered strongholds, and, you know, it's climate resilience. So as we see these increases in temperature atmospherically, which again results in warmer water temperatures, we're focusing our efforts on the areas that long-term could be maintained as cold water holdouts.
Yeah.
So this area in particular, this small drainage area on this tributary to Lyman Brook is a good example of that over time, you know, the cold waters could maintain during the warmer months in the headwaters, and like I said, that's precisely what these fish are going to be looking for. During the warmer months, they're always looking for that thermal refuge. They got to get up, you know, brook trout, where you're looking at mid-60s Fahrenheit, and then they're going to start to just vacate. And when they vacate, they're not moving downstream to bigger waters unless they're looking for deeper waters. They're moving upstream, looking for, you know, more forested, smaller stream channels, as opposed to those thermally exposed larger stream systems where the temperatures just get way out of their range for, you know, comfort or survivability for that matter.
So the goal of having Joel come tonight is when they submit the final wetland application to DES, which always comes to the Conservation Commission, that'll be smooth sailing, right? So that we won't have, you know, more comments or questions at that point. So this is our opportunity to get those all clarified from Joel, if we had it, because I don't know exactly when that application's gonna come through, in a couple months, I guess.
And I'm hoping to have it submitted, if everything goes just smooth, fast track, I would like within the next month realistically.
okay.
I think if I had this application submitted by the end of this month or mid-February, I would be very happy with that.
So I had one other question for you that because I was looking through, I mean, lots of the stuff I have
Sure.
not enough knowledge about, but at the very end of the engineering plans, my eye hit something that I can understand, which is the revegetation
Yep.
notes.
Yep.
I don't know if anybody else saw them. But it's earlier, and I don't remember where it said it.
Mhm.
I was pleased to see, will be revegetated with New Hampshire native grasses.
Correct.
Great. then you get to the notes on the engineering plan, and it's much more generic, it doesn't mention those, but that's fine, because I assume that takes place. But it also says something about, number of pounds per square foot of 10-10-10 fertilizer. Can we possibly have in with the note that talks about native New Hampshire grasses, can we also say, will not use fertilizer?
Yeah.
Because
That's something-
I think the town, we definitely don't want the phosphorus in
Sure.
there. And
Understood.
in general, I believe the town doesn't want fertilizer applied next to a stream, you know,
Yeah.
which is.
No, understood. Yeah, there's definitely some level of fertilization that takes place during the revegetation. The purpose, again, of the revegetation of the project area is just soil security, essentially.
Yeah.
The quicker we can get roots down into those soils,
Yeah.
the less vulnerable they are to
Yeah.
shifting and stuff like that. We do always use native mixes to the best of our ability, and the quantities of fertilizer, that's something that I could definitely discuss with our engineers, and more importantly, when we get to the point of contractor selection.
Yeah.
A lot of those types of decisions are made after the contractor's been selected, so that's something that we could absolutely include in the language,
Yeah.
is to either limit or, if possible,
Right. Minimize to the extent possible.
Exactly, and that's something that I can't speak toward too strongly, on the fly myself. That's something that I'd be a lot more comfortable
Right.
following up with our engineers, and I could get a little more information.
Right.
And figure out what the options would be in that regard.
Yeah.
What's the minimum amount of fertilizer that could be applied to the project site that would still allow for successful revegetation, things
Right,
like that.
and so, small enough so you know it's gonna be absorbed and not run off.
Exactly. Yeah. It seems the common rule of thumb with fertilization, at least agriculturally, is just go over what you think,
Yeah,
because
right.
it's better to go over than to go under.
No, but
for
it's
the
not,
sake of the
it's
crops.
not on a
For the sake
stream
of
bank.
exactly. But the downside of that is you see it
Yeah.
all washing in, and nitrogen, phosphorus. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Point source pollution. No, that's something I'll absolutely follow up with
Yeah.
the engineers on and see what our
It
options are.
strikes me that it's probably gonna be harder to put onto the plan, because those are all like these big things. But
Exactly.
if you put it in the notes right where the native grasses bit is,
Yeah.
that would probably be easy to modify.
Exactly, and we leave the reason that we leave those sections generic is, again, because a lot of it will depend on, those choices will be left to the contractor,
Right.
because that's part of their process of
Yeah.
constructing the project, is making those decisions. A similar example in the plan set would be the dewatering of the site. A lot of times we'll put general information into
Yeah,
the
I saw
dewatering.
that, yeah.
This project's a little bit different. I'm not sure yet with the dewatering, because I would have to dive back into the plans. But again, just as an example, that's another component that we leave a little bit generic so the contractor can actually develop the plan.
Yeah.
But we can put language in there to stipulate that, to the best of our ability, to the best that we're allowed to, in case there's any regulations or anything. We'll reduce and minimize the amount of
Yeah.
fertilizer required. I
Great,
can definitely put
great.
that in my notes.
Anybody else have any concerns about the wetland application?
Well, I was looking at the engineering plan, and it talked about stone steps.
Correct.
I wondered what those were for.
So I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Those would be, again, the other term would be grade controls. So in the stream bed itself, for the sake of maintaining that slope through the project area, we put in stone rock weirs. Usually they're about 2 layers. You have a base layer that's set in the stream bed itself, and then a second layer on top. And they're usually boulders yay big. Again, depending on the size of the stream, appropriately sized boulders. The purpose of those stone weirs is, again, to retain the stream bed substrate itself. So during big flow events, traditionally, if there's no obstructions and the stream bed material is small enough, you're gonna see a fair amount of that transport out of the system. The theory would be transport in matches transport out, net zero effect on the stream bed, right? That's the idea. But in some instances, you will see that stream bed scour. And a way to prevent that is by putting in these grade controls. Like if you go back and look at the plan set, on one of the pages, I won't quote which one because I'm not sure, but it actually shows on the upstream side of the crossing where those grade controls, those stone rock veins are placed. And in between each of them, and then up and downstream, it gives a slope percentage. So again, the purpose being between each of those, from the upstream limit of the project to the downstream limit of the project, we're looking to maintain a certain slope. And by installing those rock veins, it just facilitates that, it helps, as opposed to leaving them out and making the stream bed potentially more vulnerable to scour and what we call incision, just that stream bed getting lower and lower and lower, or the slope getting too steep, or just unpredicted changes. We want to maintain the slope as it looks on the upstream side and on the downstream side.
Is there an analogy to creating a trail and putting steps in it so it doesn't erode?
Yeah, if you, that is a good comparison. If you look at, on hiking trails, they have, what do they call them?
Check dams.
Thank you. You know, they have just to prevent that water from flowing down the entire trail and just ripping it out and knocking out the trail itself. They have just intermittently little chutes, basically, which are conveying the water away from the trail. It's not directly apples to apples, but I do agree it is a good comparison. It's just basically it's the best approach to maintain that stream slope, and more importantly, maintain that stream bed substrate. Keep it in place where it needs to be, and capture additional substrate moving upstream. Because that's, again, the theory, just the continuum of a stream channel. You would hope at any given location there's a equal input and output of stream bed material, because as that stream flows, it's just constantly moving substrate, it's constantly moving that bed material, and you don't want to gain too much and you don't want to lose too much. The goal is just to have that happy equilibrium, and that stream bed just stays right in place where you want it to be. And like I said, the grade controls, that's the best method that we have to maintain that grade. Virtually all of our stream crossing replacement projects incorporate those rock weirs to a varying degree, depending on the needs. This crossing, like I said, I believe has 2 on the upstream side, and I do not believe it has any on the downstream side. So the rock veins we're using at this location are limited, but regardless of the applicate, it always remains, the purpose always remains the same, and it's always just to maintain that stream bed.
Joel, I have infinite quantities of rocks, all sizes,
There we go.
that you can have for this project.
Yeah, we'll dig around. We'll talk to Pat. We were actually, about a year ago, Colin and I were down at the DPW yard eyeballing material, for both stream bed as well as the larger stones. Yeah, if Pat can toss them in the back of one of his.
They're in piles.
Perfect,
They're
they're already
already in piles. They're just waiting to be picked up.
No, we can go take a look at them. I'll let Pat
Infinite
know.
quantities.
And perfect. We'll
Every
consider
spring
that.
more.
We'll consider that match contribution. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
In fact, if anybody else needs rocks, you
I
can
got
have
enough of
them
my
too.
own.
Yeah, I think we all grow our own.
Wayne, as my wetland application reviewer, did you have any more questions for Joe?
No,
Okay,
no, I figured I'd wait till I heard tonight, but I'm happy.
great.
And at any point moving forward, it is a large application. These permit applications are by standard, call it 100 pages. There's a lot to chew on there. There's a lot to consume.
Yeah.
Flip through it if you have questions. You know what I mean? If something pops in your head tonight, tomorrow, a week
Yeah.
from now, please feel free to reach out.
And I'll send you an email with the 2 things that I know that we've sort of discussed that you would get to do
Sure.
or something,
Yeah.
and you can send me any. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we do, as you already mentioned, when we do finally get to the happy time of submitting this permit application and getting on the desk of DES, part of my requirements is to bring 4 additional copies to the
Right.
town to be disseminated and to your commission as
Yeah.
where one of the applications goes.
Yeah.
So I will absolutely keep you informed of how things develop moving forward, and I'll let you know when we formally deliver the application.
And at this, we aren't required to sign off because it's not expedited, it's just.
Correct. For this particular application, per DES's request, again, because this is an aquatic resource mitigation funded project, they requested that we use the standard dredge and fill application as
Yeah.
opposed to the EXP application,
Right.
which, as you mentioned, requires the
Right.
Conservation Commission signature.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for coming in.
Absolutely, I appreciate the time and your willingness to, get this project finally in the ground.
Yeah, yeah.
2018
It'll-
feels like 1,000 years ago.
Yeah,
To have
right,
this finally seen
right.
through, I'll be very happy.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're at the event announcements part of the agenda, and there were two on there that, I wanted to remind you about this MMRG mixer. This is the Conservation Commission mixer that they used to hold every year, then they had a few years off due to the pandemic. And it's where the Conservation Commissions from all 7 towns, actually, and maybe it'll be all 9 towns now. Tufton Borough and Tamworth, or, I don't know.
I don't know.
Get together, usually on a topic of one discussion, but then hear from each other, get to network with each other, meet each other, that kind of thing. Good night, Joel. And
Good night, Joe.
Thank you.
so we have an official invitation. They're holding it on February 4th, a Saturday, from 1 to 3 p.m. They're providing a free lunch for conservation commissioners. Actually, I specifically, the topic is public access and trails. And because of that topic, I also asked specifically if we could invite Mike, because I thought he'd be interested. And Veronica's already met Mike at the stewardship workshop. She said, oh yes, please invite him. And I think he's gonna attend. But I think as many of us who can attend would be great, but you do need to pre-register. I think, did anybody not get it that wants the invitation?
Oh, I got it.
You got it? Okay, so I don't need to send it to anybody.
When did you send it?
When,
It came, I don't know, I first saw it maybe 2 weeks ago?
yeah, maybe. Do you want me to send it to you?
If I do, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Over in
I'm sure,
Madbury?
Middleton,
Middleton.
right, not far. Middleton Town Hall.
Town Hall.
So yeah, I think it'd be great to get out and talk to other commissioners and talk about public access. And then there's, I mentioned last time that I think I did, I'm helping Charlie Bridges do an owl prowl. And I thought it was gonna be this week, but it's not, because he tried to hear owls and there weren't any last week. So we're postponing till the first week of February, where there's another full moon. So if anybody wants to go, that's again an MMRG event. It hasn't been publicized yet, but you will hear it if you want. I just got in an email about the New Hampshire Coverts Project, which is a training to learn about all the natural resources and conserving them and a lot of stuff. And it's a 4 different workshop training in May that UNH provides every year for people who really want to learn in depth and want to commit some amount of time to spreading that knowledge in their community in different ways. So if you're interested, actually, I'll probably send that out to everybody, and even some just people on our MCC list. So I'm just giving you a heads up about that. It does cost $50 to register. It strikes me that that's something that the MCC would probably be willing to cover, because it'd be valuable to us as a commission if you did that training. Then one more thing I just got a notice about: the New Hampshire Land Trust Coalition is also having a workshop coming up. We've gotten so many notices. This is called Hand in Hand: Conservation, Solar, and Housing. So how those things go together. And that's going to be on Thursday, February 16. I believe it's in person at the Matthew Center, which is a CELT's new center in Epping, New Hampshire. And I think that's probably free for us because we're members of the New Hampshire Land Trust Coalition. I think, right? Are we? Maybe we're not.
No, we're not.
I'm not, okay, that's right. MMRG is, but we might not be. So anyway, if you're interested, I don't know if that costs or not, to tell the truth. That's Thursday, February 16th. We'll meet again before it, so you can just keep that. But again, I'll probably send that out too. Okay. CC materials, well, instead of that, I sent around the cards, and I believe everybody signed them. One card to Mark Jacobs to thank him for his contributions, and one card to Deb McCormick, since we didn't get that done last time.
Yeah, I have them here.
Okay, and anybody need to sign still? I think everybody did. Okay, so we're on to the minutes from last time. I sent them out. Jen did a great job. Thank you, Jen. I did just a couple edits that were in red and track changes. So did anybody have anything else they wanted to change in these minutes?
Nope.
Or
Read 'em?
anyone want to make a motion about accepting them with revisions, or unless you want to not accept revisions?
I'll make a motion to
Yeah,
accept
I
with the
was gonna
revision.
say.
Okay, okay. Are
I'll
you-
second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that was everybody. Thank you. And you got the two motions, the motion and accept, okay, great, thanks. Okay, so now we're gonna get Steve's financial report, which I think he brought with him.
Well, it's not exactly financial report. I
But it's
still,
a,
did you already have that?
I already had it.
And I don't think Bob has it.
no, I don't think I got
You
it.
don't have it. And
Thanks.
Sharon? Here. So all this is a listing of what the 2022 budgets and 2023 budgets are.
Oh, right.
And the coming year's budget, this year now, is actually a little bit lower than last year's because we took out the legal defense money, since that's now being put into a revolving fund, a reserve fund. So that's just gonna get $1,000 in it every year, hopefully forever. In terms of the 2022 budget, I still have some expenses to submit, but the big one is if Norway Plains manages to finish doing the ball property remarking, and if they do, we should pretty much use up our money.
So how much did you submit for them already? They sent us one invoice for having partially finished the work there.
I can't remember, was it 11, it was around 1,500, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, I thought it was maybe 1,400, although we have that
Yeah,
figure
something-
for, that's also the figure for the, whatchamacallit.
Well, Chris Kane was 1140, that's,
Was that all he was?
I think that's what it, or maybe.
Or maybe it's the reverse.
Yeah, I think that was, he was 1140, and I've submitted that.
Okay.
But I don't, as usual, I have not yet received a detailed report of the conservation, of our budget, because it's just too early in the month for Brittany to have gotten to it. So, I'll probably get it pretty soon. But I expect that we're currently under our budget, and when we submit the Norway Plains bill, we'll be right there, or maybe even a little over.
And Jeff, have you already been reimbursed?
I got reimbursed for around $200 for their signs. I didn't get any for the posts that I got at Home Depot.
I think that was submitted afterwards, but
Yes,
I'm
it
not sure.
was.
Yeah, so that's in the second batch of stuff that I put in, so you'll in fact, Brittany asked me a question about that today, because I started it by copying another check request, and I had left some additional money on that, so she said, should that really be there? And no, it shouldn't have been there, so she's on her toes about that stuff. So she just worked on that today, you'll probably get the check pretty soon.
Okay, so actually, I'm gonna jump ahead and say that last time we discussed, what, if we needed to get other things spent before. And one thing we were gonna do was get this boilerplate conservation restriction deed worked on by a town attorney. Well, I asked Chris right before I went on our trip if he could contact the town attorney about doing that, because I thought maybe I needed to go through him. He never responded. I think actually, now that I think about it, I think that he wanted me to do that, not to ask him to do it. It hasn't been done, but actually that turns out just as well, because Steve had forgotten one fairly significant expense for the year, which is the water quality testing, which which was $900. So we didn't have the $500 for the boilerplate, it turns out. So it's just as well, and we'll just when we get to that agenda item, we'll talk more about how we want to proceed on that. Anyway, so that's just our current state for the budget.
Yeah. and
Anything
it
else
is-
you want to say?
Well, just that, it's nice that UNH got us the water testing bill this time in December instead of in January.
Right, right.
Yeah, and Chris Kane got it, the invoice in December also, which was good.
Yeah,
And because we had pre-voted to pay for it, he was able to already submit that, I guess.
yeah.
Right. Okay. But we will go over the his work when we get to that. All right. And, so wetland and shoreline permit applications, that was what Joel talked about, so we're done with that.
Virginia,
Oh,
I have a question.
yes.
Do you have to approve his financial report? that
It's
he
not,
submitted?
it's not the same as a report, actually. This was
Okay.
kind of a review, so I
Yeah,
don't
what I
think,
did,
we don't really have to this time.
Okay.
It didn't have any real budget, item, no report, no bank reports.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for asking.
You're welcome.
Jeff, Trail Volunteers Group, any updates on what you've been doing?
Well, that storm we had just before Christmas was a doozy. It knocked a big pine over at Casey Road. That's since been cleaned up, but you'll find when you walk by there, you'll have a new place to sit down. Lots of little branches came down, but the rest of the trail down to Lyman Brook is now okay. The new part of the trail out to the Overlook Knoll had a couple of soft spots in it where there were streams that came out of nowhere. And if that becomes problematic with people sinking their feet in there before it dries up, it can easily be broached with one of those 2-board 6-foot bridges,
Oh, I see.
like
Uh-huh.
it's down at the bottom of the
Uh-huh.
hill
Uh-huh.
across that stream.
That reminds me that I did get a final word from Veronica. Remember, there was some question about if we should have asked MMRG before that trail was put in.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently they decided that the brushing work doesn't really count as, what's the word they have? Because you're not supposed to do any, land modification or something. And anyway, I think that the brush work doesn't count. Where you're actually digging does count, I believe. But Veronica's going to send us guidelines on that, so we better
Good.
can understand what we can do without notifying and what we have to notify them in advance of. But apparently, the trail that Jeff and Mike had worked on was not enough of modification to count as something we should have pre-notified them about. She told me that.
Good.
Keep in mind, however, if you put down lots and lots of boards, that will start to count that way, I think.
Mhm.
So that needs to, it's 250 square feet of, I can't remember what the word is, but some kind of land modification. And if it's more than that, you've got to pre-notify them before you do it.
And that new trail was very easy to follow. I had done some work on clearing the opening to the stone bridge that I think I mentioned. And I was very pleased after this flood that it had not overflowed.
You mean the opening underneath it where the
Yeah.
water flows? Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Great.
So I think the beaver dam might have survived because I didn't see any overflow of branches anywhere. Although the brook itself did overshoot its banks by like up to 20 feet. But that was
A lot of
nothing,
places did.
that was nothing compared to Jones Brook.
Ah,
I was amazed at how much that overshot it. The water came right up to the old roadway where you come in and,
I don't know what old roadway you're speaking of.
what they used to haul their trucks in. You know where the chain is across the road?
As you walk in, past the first place you stop at the brook, and then you get to, there are these posts, one on either side of the
Yeah.
road,
yeah.
okay.
The water came right up to the road's edge.
Did it, oh, so it didn't go over it, but it came up to it.
Right.
Huh,
That's a little alarming, but a week later, it was all dried out.
Hmm.
The magic of wetlands, I guess.
But-
But where the trail is, that was,
the new trail that you,
the
put
new
in.
trail was all high and dry,
ah, okay,
so it's well drained
uh-huh.
and,
Oh, great, that's a good test of it,
yep.
great.
Mike said the beaver dam out there got washed away, most of it. Today I got a message from him that he was clearing up some more trash from way back in. He's gonna haul it out with a sled. And I'll be speaking him to again. I'm gonna pick it up there if it's not too big to get in my car.
Okay. Come spring, when we don't have the plow on the truck, we can use the truck, but while the plow's on it, that would not work.
Well, yeah, the plow wouldn't so much.
Well, the chains.
Yeah, there's chains on it, so it shouldn't be driven
Yeah,
on
so, I mean, if you,
paved roads,
if-
and also I have weight in the back. I have
but if you
on-
wanna just accumulate it somewhere and wait till we have a truck,
Yeah, I
that's
told him,
an option.
We have our diesel, we could come out with our 2,500 and pick up whatever you need.
I would do it.
Yeah,
yep,
so
But it-
there
it
are
shouldn't-
so you have options.
yeah, it shouldn't be anything too big. There's a wheel with a tire on it. They might be heavy, and there's supposedly a child's four-wheel vehicle. I don't know how heavy that is, but as long as I can fit it in the back of my car or my wife's 4Runner. She won't like me getting it dirty, but
I was
Yeah,
gonna
really,
say,
you might as well
Right.
wait for a truck.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
you
You just
we do
email me.
encourage you, Jeff, to
Take it easy.
incorporate us into your plans sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not, it doesn't
just
have to
drop
be a
me an email
one-person
and I'll
shop.
pop over. I live in Milton Mills, it's not far for me to come out and I don't do anything except see my grandkids and sew and plan on my vegetables.
okay. There was a new wildlife sighting down in Jones Brook,
Yeah?
a white rabbit.
Oh. Oh, is it white for winter then? Probably,
Yeah.
probably it's a snowshoe hare.
Snowshoe hare, that's what
Nice.
Mike
So,
said.
oh, this was Mike who saw it?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Unfortunately, there's no snow, so the poor thing is standing out.
Yeah.
Well, but then again,
But,
those owls need something to eat, so.
Another really nice thing is, last time I was down to Jones Brook, I encountered, while I was coming out, a couple with a dog going in, so it's starting to get some traffic. They were a couple from Acton that said they'd been driving by the area for years and years and never noticed there was anything there.
Uh-huh, right, but the sign and the clearing made it obvious now. It's great. Very good. You know what, we should think about a way to have the Conservation Commission acknowledged there, that we're stewarding the property. Sometime we should think about that. And, well, I think I might have mentioned this to you one time. When I was up in Wolfboro, a preserve up there, the boundary markers are not the typical boundary markers saying, easement boundary or whatever. They're markers saying, this land is managed by the Wolfboro Conservation Commission, call X number if you have any questions. We could do something like that too. We could get some signs made with our name and maybe with our email address or whatever. so that, just to get acknowledged, and also to, as a way for people to ask questions if they have them about, or to report any problems on the land. That's another, would be a benefit of it, if they see somebody dumping, or, you know, see, that would be another. So we should, again, think about that sometime, if we wanna have that kind of sign that is a little more informative than just a boundary marker. Okay. Okay?
Perhaps, well, I was wondering if if we foresee in the future putting maps there.
Oh, yeah, that's
Um,
another, right, a kiosk, in other words, or just a map box.
Yeah, you can just,
Yeah,
there's those railroad ties stuck in the ground that we could use like a little side of the house mailbox and put a sign on that, but what we got right now for maps, it doesn't include that area, but we do have those maps of places around town that people can go.
right, we could include those there, and have a little sign on the box too, just saying that the Conservation Commission, you know, has oversight of this property, or stewards this property, or, you know, or something like that. So, yeah, so if you wanna think about a design or something for something like that, even if we don't have maps of the particular trails there yet, we could put the other maps, and it could have a sign about,
Yeah,
so.
well,
I
start
think-
thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah,
And going back to Casey Road, Mike and I went to that Moose Mountain presentation on land stewardship.
uh-huh,
I didn't realize that when I signed up for it, that they were looking for stewards to join Moose Mountains to
Oh.
do some volunteer work for them. I haven't figured out if I have time for that yet, but I know Mike has already volunteered a couple of times.
uh-huh.
And
Well, the fact that you do Casey Road is actually serving them as well as us, because they're the
Yeah.
easement holders, so you could, it seems to me that could count. I mean, that, since you're stewarding, and you could actually probably do the boundary walking too for them,
Well, at that training, John Newt came over to Casey Road in the afternoon. We broke up into two groups,
uh-huh,
and I found out that John Newt is already their land steward
yes, yes,
for that conservation area. I asked him to let me know when he wants to go out and do it again, and I'll go with him.
oh, great, yeah, good idea, uh-huh, and that would be, then you could take it over, because I remember him saying something about he'll retire one of these days on that, so, or on something, so that would,
I didn't realize he was on the planning board.
right, that's pretty new, he was elected maybe just last year, I'm not sure,
I think it was last year.
yeah. Okay, we need to move on.
Yep,
Um,
but,
Yeah, sorry.
Jeff, are you aware of the New Hampshire Association of Conservation Commission? They have a Leave No Trace virtual town hall workshop on January 19th at 1 PM. I went and I did the one with them up at Diana's Baths, all right? And, you know, it was kind of complement everything that we do as people come onto our properties, their properties, the whole concept of Leave No Trace.
Matter of fact, I got that announcement today.
Oh, did you?
I don't, maybe I didn't, I haven't noticed it yet.
NHACC, January 19th.
Yeah,
I think it's like 1 o'clock, it's free, it's a virtual town hall, and I don't remember what I had for dinner, so anyway.
Oh.
But as much as I remember.
so actually, that's great, I'm glad you mentioned that. In the future, I'll try to remember when I do event announcements to ask who else has event announcements, like,
yep.
and just interrupt me if I don't mention that.
No problem.
Great,
Can-
Okay.
Should we lead into the signage?
no, we don't have time, I'm sorry, we've got it, we may not even get back to it.
Okay.
Because we've got all the monitoring reports and other stuff. I just want to, so we're now on agenda item 10, which is all of our easements and conservation lands. And just going through the list, one more thing about Jonesbrook Park is Jill did assure me that she's gonna work on a memorandum of understanding about getting the easement on it that both the town and MMRG would sign, and she's gonna try to get to that this month. On Casey Road Conservation Land, this is, I don't think I mentioned this to you, Jeff. When the workshop was held there, and people were going around the boundaries practicing monitoring, Les Elder is in a butter, and he was concerned about all the people all of a sudden, and he emailed me and said, what's happening on Casey Road Conservation Land? And I said, well, my understanding is there's this workshop there today, and I sent it, and he, let's see, he wrote back. I said I said that he could contact MMRG. I think that's what I said about it. And he wrote back and he said, well, I just would have liked to have been notified as an abutter. And he actually was concerned that people were on his property. Although Jill assured me that they weren't, that they were following the boundaries. So that's, I don't know. His property isn't posted, so.
Actually, it is.
Oh, okay. Excuse me. You know better than I do because I wasn't there. But anyway, he said he would have liked to have been notified. I asked afterwards, since he said that, I asked Jill if they would consider notifying the abutters when they hold a workshop there, and she said no. She declined because it's time and expense, and because it is public access land that she didn't feel they should have to. So it made me think, well, do we want to take that on? We do want to have good relations with the abutters. On the other hand, it is public access. Do we want to, one thing I've thought of, should we ask MMRG to always let us know when they're gonna have an event, and then we notify abutters?
I say no.
I
I mean,
don't-
it's public asset,
Yeah,
access.
if it was a state park, you wouldn't demand that the state notify the abutters.
Yeah, okay.
I was with that group that went along the edge of his property.
Uh-huh,
And as a matter of fact, while we were out there, my wife received a Facebook message wondering what was going on
Uh-huh.
from Les.
I did too.
You did
Oh,
too?
yeah?
He texted me.
okay.
All due respect
Yep,
to Les,
yeah.
Yeah, and we are being.
he does,
Yep.
Hi, Les.
he does,
We're on YouTube.
he does provide valuable services to the community. It has for a long time, but I think if a person looks out their back window and there's 10 people going by the edge of the property and they're all wearing identical orange hats, that it's pretty clear that it's not a homeless encampment starting. I don't know what he's really afraid of, but
He did.
If-
He did mention that that he does some target shooting on his property. And I don't know if he is a hunter or not, but he said then that could be an issue.
Well, then, what, does he want notification anytime anybody's on the property?
Right.
What's the difference?
I think my feeling is probably he's just really not used to it. We have people just have never been there before, Although we've been walking the trails, nobody walks the boundaries very much, and this is new to him. My guess is that after the first time, or maybe another time, he'll get more used to it, and it won't be so shocking and that kind of thing. But this first time it was, because there's never been group activities out there except right at the entrance and maybe going down to the stream, which is not where he lives. He lives on sort of the other side. So
I do
yeah.
not mind personally informing Les
Mhm.
if I find out that there's going to be something going on
Mhm.
there. But I don't think we should have to inform people we don't really know. It's not like,
Yeah, but if you
Well,
start
if
informing one
we-
person, they're gonna
if we
all expect it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
If you start notifying one person, they're gonna all expect it. They could.
Maybe. I mean, one thing that occurs to me is we certainly would only notify people whose email address we've had. We're not going to send letters. So I have Les's email address, he has mine. So it was easy for me to respond, well, it happened that I could respond, although it was a couple hours late. But that wouldn't be hard if I knew there was an event to email him or for Jeff to email. And if somebody else, you know, says to Les, you know, they didn't write me, he can tell them, well, send in your email address and, you know, they can probably let you know too. Because MMRG certainly told us that they were gonna do it. And I did wonder if we should ask groups to notify us in advance if they're doing a group activity. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, I kind of thought that even if you just had a sign, you know, like this, that says event today, that's it, just something, all right? At the beginning of the road or at the beginning of, you know, the property, whatever, you know, that kind of covers it, all right? So, but I agree with Bob, it's public land, but as a courtesy, and he did, so he emailed you, he emailed me, he emailed you, it obviously upset him. It wouldn't hurt in the future to have either some kind of sign. I get that MIG doesn't want to have to be bothered with it, but, you know, it doesn't take much to go and take, you know, this, you know what I'm talking about. Just event today. You know, you see them all the time.
And certainly Jeff and I or you can try to notify him ahead of some other one. And just, and as I said, he will probably get used to it eventually, but for
Yeah,
a
it's
few
a
events that we could. I don't know what the law is, and it'll be a question in my mind for the public access workshop, the CC Mixer, is what are the restrictions on events? I mean, what if somebody decided to hold their wedding there and invited 200 of their friends and bust them in from some other parking lot? You know, is that allowed? You know, I guess it is, it's public access. But does the town have, it's not in the easement doesn't say anything about restricting. So, but it's a question I have in my mind. You know, this event clearly is a responsible organization. It was only maybe 20 people at the most, I'm sure. I don't know how many, but how
Yeah, it
many?
was
A dozen, 20?
20 people.
20 people. But I don't know if there is some tipping point where it would not, we would start being concerned. And it occurs to me we could have something on the kiosk saying, if you're going to hold a group event, please have the courtesy to notify the town in advance, or the MCC with our email. We, you know, that might, even though it's not required, we can't sue them if they don't, they might be willing. So I'm just throwing all these out and
Yep.
letting you know about this at the moment. We don't have to take any steps tonight, but we can.
I like that idea of putting up an event today sign.
Uh-huh. So actually, you would be the one who would be most likely to do it because you're there, you could just run across and, so we need to just get you an event today sign that you could put over on the kiosk or somewhere, or out front of the parking lot.
Or right in front of Les's property.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in front of Les's house. Well, he'll notify Les. As I said, it's just new, you know, he's used to being quiet, nobody there, and all of a sudden he sees this big gang of people walking by.
And his dogs were barking and
Uh-huh,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, nothing new on the Spalding Turnpike or Dames Brook properties, the old ski area. So, since we didn't get a boilerplate deed restriction, we talked about trying to go ahead and get a deed restriction. I guess my question is, how do we proceed on that? Should I go to the select board and say, look, we want to do this, are you going to be willing to sign? Or do I just get it drafted first and then hope they're willing to sign? I'm a little concerned about doing the latter in case they're going to put up a fuss, but then again, they might want to know what it'll look like. I guess we could use the example of our other deed restriction, which is on the Spalding Turnpike property, although I don't know if the new attorney would write it the same way that the old attorney did. That's the trouble. Anybody have any thoughts on on how to proceed on that, or suggestions.
If I was a board of selectmen, I think I'd probably like to see something in writing. You know, what are you referring to, you know? Something I
Right.
can look at ahead of time.
Right, yeah,
So I can make an intelligent comment maybe, all right?
yeah. And,
And show them a sample,
right,
you know, so.
yeah, so in other words, the sample of the other one,
Right,
and tell them it may not look exactly the same, but this is the kind of thing.
yep,
Okay, uh-huh. And then ask if they're gonna be willing to sign it. I mean, I don't wanna pay the attorney and then be told
right.
they don't wanna sign it. That's the
Right.
key, okay, okay. Yep. The Ball property, okay, so I CC'd you all on a email to Chris Jacobs, about the Ball property, right? You all saw that. I'm not gonna mention any specifics tonight, because I do not know if a letter has yet gone out to the abutting landowners who are encroaching on the Ball property. Norway Plains found this significant encroachment, and because they were doing what we had asked, which is defining some of those boundaries better. But because I don't know if the landowners have been notified yet, I do not wanna say anything in this meeting, because it may be a non-public hearing when it comes to that. And my suggestion to Chris was to get them to come in and discuss it with the select board. So I was starting to write a letter to that effect. And then I realized, well, if I'm gonna tell them to come to the select board, I really better talk about it with Chris first to make sure that would be appropriate. And then when I called him, he said, well, I'll write a letter. So it was sort of like he was taking it out of my hands. I realized afterwards that that's actually appropriate. It took me aback at first, but I have heard from other conservation commissions that when they find a problem on their conservation land, they're an advisory board, so they turn it over to their select board to deal with. And in this case, it's a real encroachment on the town-owned land. It's the select board that owns, because they're the government, owns the town-owned land. So it is appropriate for the select board to deal with it. And so essentially it is out of our hands now. I did send Chris my suggested letter, which I wasn't just gonna say, you know, deal with it. I was gonna give them an opportunity to come discuss it, and maybe trade some land for other land. Although that would be expensive, I wouldn't want the CC to have to pay for it. But because it might be a hardship to them to remove the encroachment, maybe they could do a small land trade. I don't know. Anyway, that's the status at the moment, and it's, as I said, out of our hands, so we'll leave it. Now, I think that for smaller, minor encroachments like some litter or parking boats or something, we can still probably deal with those ourselves unless we find that landowners simply don't respond, and then if we think it's worth it, again, we can turn it over to the select board to decide how to deal with it. We have to keep that in mind. For town-owned land, we may be managers, we certainly, maintain the trails, we consider the wildlife and all that, but when it comes to actually protecting the boundaries, it's up to the select board.
Yep.
Okay. The whole example actually reinforced for me the need for prevention. And that you can't just overlook minor infractions too long, because what happened in this case is that a previous owner of that abutting property had also encroached to some degree, in a more minor way, just like mowing lawn type of thing, or dumping a little bit, nothing major. But that probably, although I think the CC contacted them too, I don't know if it ever got resolved, and so it sort of got passed on. Maybe the successive landowners didn't even know that they were encroaching. That's quite possible, it seems to me. I think also, however, that the boundary markers may have been removed in some cases, where a stake was, and this is a problem on some of our easement properties too, that the boundary markers are disappearing. And we're gonna have to figure out how to deal with that, cause this is, you know, the monitors can't find their way, don't know where the boundary is, so don't know where the encroachments are. And that was a problem in this case, is us not knowing where the encroachments were.
Suggestion?
Yeah,
One thing we might do is all of the trees that we put the markers on, we also should take a hatchet and excise a scar on the tree. Cause that can't be removed, and we can paint it. That's, you know, standard practice. I don't particularly like doing it to the tree, but they won't be able to get rid of that.
yeah,
And we'll
Yeah.
know, we'll be able to find it. It may not have the marker, but we'll be able to find it.
yeah, yeah.
I have a question on the
yes.
markers too. I noticed one on the stewardship, or the monitoring, Kane monitoring
Yes.
reports, he mentioned several times, you know, things were missing, hard to find markers.
Yes,
Is he not certified or qualified, or is it not his job to add, like, he's out there doing the
he
GPS?
does, in fact, he does put up markers sometimes, he has markers, and in fact, he usually charges us for a little bit of extra of putting markers in place in addition. But he's not a surveyor. And so if it's a really fine line in terms of where it goes, or if there used to be a stake in place and it's no longer there, then he may not know. I mean, he uses his GPS as best he can, but this is a question of, in some cases, they don't know exactly where it is.
Okay, so
Um,
part of when he's out there walking, he does add stuff if he knows for sure
Yes.
this is where it belongs.
Yes, he does.
As we would do if we start doing the monitoring.
Yes,
Okay.
but we've gotta make sure we're not doing it unless we're really pretty sure where it goes. We need to get back to the Ball property, cause they have remarked it and get more of our signs in. They've got flagging there now. But some of these other ones, that's why I was mentioning it, and you're absolutely right, that Chris Kane is having difficulty now, and some of those were remarked just 10 years ago. I mean, there were stakes put in by surveys, and they're no longer there. This is not good. So I was just coming to that, in fact. So let's go on to the easements, because that's what, we now have his reports, and we're just getting onto that question. So I'm gonna go through them in alphabetical order, which is how he did it, pretty much. One thing that I had an advantage of over all of you, when he would refer to these problems, I was able to look back at the baselines in some question. The baseline being when they went out the first time and reported on the whole property, and often it was just surveyed and well marked, and I could look at that, and I'm probably gonna send you the baseline so that you can refer to that in the future when you're looking. It's called a baseline documentation, BDR, and it usually has a survey attached to it, and it has a description of the property, and it tells if the boundary is well marked, and it tells if there were any encroachments at that time. And the MCC paid to have a baseline done for all these different properties. One question I have is, did anyone ever provide Chris Kane with the baselines? Because it would be useful for him too, and I don't know, I have to ask him, because you may remember on our short monitoring report when we went out to do each of our own town-owned lands, one of the first questions was, were the documents reviewed before the monitoring happened? Remember that question? That question is not on Chris Kane's report, and I don't know if he reviews the documents, and sometimes I wasn't sure that he did, or that he has them. Maybe he reviewed his last year's monitoring report, but not the one 10 years ago that says it's all well marked, you know, so they should be there. So that's something to keep in mind. And it also made me wonder if we want to revise his report to look more like the one we were using, instead of the one that he told me one time he didn't really like the report form that he uses. And I can see why. There's some questions like that one about did you review things that seem to be missing, and others it seems, I don't know, it just didn't seem ideal. but let's just go through the properties. Frizzell is this one that's 100 meters, no, 100 feet from a stream, a long section of stream. I think it's Great Brook. Do you notice that? It's this long, thin one in the backland, no direct access, and it just goes along Lyman Brook. Do you remember that one? It's called Frizzell. And he mentioned that there's evidence of ATVs in a trail, and there are puddles, but no violations, because motorized vehicles are allowed in that easement. They are not prohibited. And he didn't think that any of the trail erosion effect was getting into the stream. It was puddling in the trail, but it didn't seem to be going into the stream, and that was the important thing. So that's all. That's what I got out of Frizzell. Did anybody else have any comments on that one? If you remember it, I think that was the first. The second one was Lancey Ward, and that's a really complicated looking easement. It's very jaggedy. It's all around a wetland in the back of, I think it's 3 different houses, 3 different parcels. And it's curvy. It's not straight lines. The way it was originally designed as an easement, it was put on the survey, and it's all these kind of scoopy lines. And now if you look at Chris Kane's map that shows it, he's in all these rectangles. So it's like, it's not even represented correctly. There's no way to actually have that boundary well represented. Well, maybe there would be, but I don't know how, for him to actually follow it. And he complained about that one being difficult to follow. And I don't know how we would get that actually marked on land. I mean, we'd have to pay a surveyor to do that. It would be tricky. And it might have to be done with stakes because of the way it sort of scoops around. And what else did he say about that? Oh, that's the one he said maybe there's a chicken coop. And he did complain about a lack of monumentation on it. So that's going to get harder to be sure if there is encroachment or not. Lavalier is another one in back of 1 or 2. I think it's just in the back of 1. That's off of Mason Road. And he didn't mention any problems there, although getting to it is a trick because you're going across posted property.
I think he mentioned that an abutter had thrown brush and Christmas trees over the wall onto it.
No, that was.
That's
the
Zader.
Zader property.
Ah,
Yeah. And that one, we hold the backup interest, not the primary easement, but the backup easement. Liberty Circle, that's the one that has the beaver. Liberty Circle open space is the one that has the beaver dam next to Casey Road. He found a bag of trash, and he said in that one specifically the boundary needs remarking. That's one where I had noticed a smell of septic last year, and I had asked him if he would please pay attention to that. He didn't make any notation one way or the other if he noticed. I think, and actually litter is not usually an actual violation as long as there's no hazardous waste, but we try to get people to not do that. Lyman Brook, that's the other name for the Heron Rookery. That one, he said there were a couple things he said there were a couple bridges and a deck. He had the picture of the deck with a couple chairs sitting on it.
Mm-hmm.
And he got a couple pictures of bridges. One of them was a little tiny arched bridge, and one was a long, kind of a boardwalk. And he thought all of those were in the easement. He called it the but it's weird that easement has something called a common area, and then it also has the easement in the back of individual lots. I think the common area is owned in common. It's supposed to be by a homeowners association, I suspect, although I didn't get to look at that easement. That's one that I don't have. But those could be, those bridges, it's sort of, they're not allowed. There's no structures allowed. He made this comment. The only structures that are allowed are for the purposes of nature observation in the common area. That's right, I remember, that's what he said. The common area, and I believe I was able to figure out what the common area is by looking at the map, and again, this is not something you probably have access to. I was able to sort of figure out, and I believe all the things that he was saying are not in the common area, so they wouldn't really be allowed. So then the question is, so are we gonna do anything about that? I mean, this is an easement that we're responsible for. These are pretty minor, and on the other hand, we don't want people adding to them and making them more so.
But didn't he say, I thought he clarified if it was used to view wildlife, then it was kind of a borderline. Are they using that to enter an area to view wildlife? Then he
Yeah.
thought it met the requirements of the easement.
Well, it does and it doesn't, and I think it doesn't because I believe that that's only allowed in the common area. And if I'm correct about where the common area is, and I could look at his map and see where the photographs were taken, I don't believe that those items, those bridges, are in what's in the common, are in part of the common area. We'd need to review that with more care, more detail. Because I wanted to go that route too, Sharon, actually. It's like, okay, it's for nature viewing, fine. But then I read it again, and the way I read it now, actually, so we're probably gonna have to come back and discuss these again, is what it amounts to. And I also had a question about if the easement is well defined in the backs of those yards, because the easement is pretty close to the backs of all those houses. Do you know if those were?
They were marked, it was all marked, but it's very difficult to see the markers because it's very dense
Yeah,
woods, but yeah, it was all marked.
yeah.
And I didn't read that, so I can't speak too well to
Oh,
it,
okay, okay.
but there was blanking on their name, but they had a small bridge which was across a stream at the edge of their, well, it wasn't at the edge of their property, it was at the edge of the
The easement.
the lawn going into the easement area, and
Yeah,
and it was so that their wheelchair bound
right,
parent could go and put his wheelchair on there and watch things.
right,
Now, it's so minor,
yeah,
I can't get excited about it.
yeah.
And I don't know what the others are, but I think all that stuff is so that people can better access the woods and the buffer, and I'm not that worried
Yeah.
about it, unless, if they were putting in something huge, that would be something, but this is basically something that gets them across a wet area, and it may actually prevent some damage
Right.
to the wetland and to the pond there.
Yeah, I thought of that too.
Yeah, so I can't get too excited about it. You know, those people have very limited backyard areas because of the way the lines of the easement were drawn.
Yeah.
I
I think that you're generally right. The only concern I have about it is because I've seen it in other places where it starts getting multiplied. You know, in other words, the bridge becomes, like gets a roof on it, you know, or, or gets like, permanent. That's what happened, for example, on this, kind of what happened on the encroachment on the Ball property.
Right.
So I think we have to be very scrupulous in making sure, and maybe we wanna go out halfway through the year and make sure that these things aren't changing. You know, I agree with you, the current situation is not objectionable, but one, we don't really wanna say publicly, that, you can go do this on your easement, because it's not, it really isn't allowed. And we also, we don't wanna give that impression that we're lax,
Right.
because we can get sued. And yet, we don't wanna, you know, make hell for people who are basically, doing, you know, nothing that's gonna damage, the natural resources.
Yeah, I think that that's the intent of the easement, is to prevent damage to the natural resource. So, but yeah, I know, it's always a problem when you take a very literal interpretation, and that's, so.
Yeah. Well, and there are other priorities probably. Getting the boundaries marked on some of these other ones where we're losing track of them is probably more important right now.
Yeah, and I do think it would be valuable to go through and not just mark them with the markers, but
Yeah.
to score the trees so that we can find them again. But boy, it's hard finding those, it is hard finding the markers on that property, because those are very dense woods.
And in some cases, we're gonna need to pay for surveys again, I'm afraid.
Well, we just paid for a survey on that,
Yeah.
so we really shouldn't need to.
I know.
Yeah.
So, getting to where, okay, for example, to a lot of Hollier, Liberty Circle, Lyman Brook, Silver Springs, that had no changes. On the other hand, he mentioned, last year, Silver Springs is another one, small easement in 2 parcels off of Silver Street. Last year, he mentioned there was runoff from a neighboring lot. I complained to Brian Boyers about it, he's the code enforcer for town. He went and looked, he said he couldn't see anything. And this year, Chris Kane didn't mention it, so, maybe that's just good news, that it's no longer, that it's resolved. Wallace Way is the one where Gary Tremblay offered to donate the land to the town, and we said, no, thank you. I haven't seen that that's transferred hands. Chris Kane mentioned that it was easier to follow the boundaries this year because it was drier than normal. There wasn't any problem. And the new easements, are never a problem, they were so well marked. But some of these, as I said, oh, I know, which one was it? I think it was Lancey Ward, where they complained about the lack of monumentation. And I looked, and 10 years ago, they did the baseline report, and it said, this is really well done. The town paid for a surveyor to go out there and place a stake with a marker at each corner. And this is the one that's kind of curvy, and so there were lots of corners. It looked to me like there were probably 15 corners, 15 stakes that were placed. And now they're saying it's very hard to follow. And they only managed to find a few corner stakes, which makes me think that they've been removed, which is really, that's only 10 years. And I don't know what we're gonna do about that. These are, just metal stakes because it was at the edge of the forest and the field. Now either,
Actually, Virginia, my recollection is that part of the reason they were on stakes is that there wasn't it was like an imaginary line. It wasn't denoting a natural boundary of any sort.
Right.
And that's part of the problem.
yes, this is
So-
the one that's, they're gonna like this.
So my suggestion would be that we probably need to have it redone at some point in time, and we need to, in addition to having the marker on that, we need to have something that says illegal to remove or modify this boundary marker.
Yeah, yeah,
Fine, $200,
yeah.
something like that. And probably we need to talk to the select board about that and see how.
That's
and-
true.
Yeah.
Because of the cost of that.
Yeah, and because if it has no teeth, then it's just gonna continue to happen, and it may continue to happen anyway, because how do you ever catch people when they're essentially just going into their backyard and pulling up a stake? It's,
Yeah. Yeah, I actually, in that particular case, it sounds like that's probably how we have to proceed, is to tell the select board. And what was the other one where they said it's needing boundary markers, he specifically said that they're, Liberty Circle. That surprised me. Actually, Jonathan Newt might be able to help with that because that's the one that abuts Casey Road Conservation Land.
Right.
And he's pretty familiar with that boundary. So he might be able to help. I wonder if maybe I should contact him about that. And what he usually does is he paints, but if somebody could go along with him.
Yeah, and as an easy first step, you can just buy a can of spray paint and
Yeah.
mark it with that.
Or do some of both. Yeah, okay.
It's kind of an odd shaped.
It's very odd shaped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It cuts way into.
And it's confusing because on both sides it says, Town of Milton easement. Facing both directions. But I think he probably would be, I mean, it was surveyed not that long ago. The Casey Road Conservation Land got it, I believe. And he was part of that. He helped with that survey. So I bet he could help us. I'm gonna ask him if everybody agrees with, okay. So on Lancey Ward, which has lost most of its stakes, I think we approached the select board. Liberty Circle, we approached Jonathan Newt. Which were the other ones that had the most problems that we need to address? Silver Spring, I guess those were the biggest ones. Okay. Were there any corrections or any requests of Chris Kane, or questions about his reports or that you had? Anything that wasn't clear or something? Okay. So
I tried to call it up and all I could get was the Lavalier.
you couldn't open all the reports?
No,
Oh.
but that's me. I'm technologically challenged.
Well, in the future, Jeff, if you let me know in time, I can send you them as a PDF attachment or something.
I just copied the link and put the link into a new, search, and then went right to it and pulled them all up as documents in my
Uh-huh.
Google Drive.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I didn't have a problem with it. Were other people able to open them? Did anybody else try?
Yep.
Yeah,
did?
I
Okay.
had no trouble.
Yep.
Okay, but Jeff, as I said, if you tell me in time, not today, I wouldn't have been able to, but a few days ahead or a week ahead or whatever, I guess of course I only sent it. He only gave it to me a few days ahead, so it was just very last minute, but, I could download them and send them to you as individual PDF files, is one option. So, does anybody have any feeling of maybe wanting him to change the form, the way I was suggesting?
You can ask him to add that,
Yeah.
that item, that wouldn't be difficult for
Yeah,
him to do.
I mean, a lot of the stuff, it has all these check marks of not observed, that could be sort of replaced with, is there any violation, and describe it, rather than having to,
Right,
I mean, in other words, it could look
paragraph.
more like the form we used for our own properties, if we wanted. I think maybe I'll ask him what he would think about changing the form if we changed it, and would that would we need to pay him extra to change, you know, to like start over on a new set? Because it's probably, I can tell that he reuses the form every year. You know, he starts from last year's, and he uses even a lot of the text is almost identical when he writes it. It's just, and so if he had to start on some new form, I bet it would take him more time, and he might want to be paid more.
Well, if he said earlier that he said he didn't like the form.
Right.
So if he has one that he likes, let's ask him to show us what he
Well,
likes.
I did tell him, feel free to change if he had one he liked, and he didn't respond to that. But I will address that again with him, if he has, to see if he has one that he likes. I would like it if he said if he reviewed the last ones. And seems to me there was some other question that might have been useful. Well, I know. The form that he uses does not ask about the boundaries. That's a big question. Our form asked about the boundaries, the one we used, and he always addresses it in the text at the bottom, but there's not a question about it. It seems to me there should be a question, because that's an important issue, obviously. So that's another thing. So I will ask him what he thinks about it, if he has one he likes better, you know, if it'll cost more, because yeah. And nothing definite, but just to sort of see. Okay. And you got the new timber management notification,
Yeah.
which, that was good timing, so he got that. I'm gonna skip 11, 12, 13, unless Jen, you have any update on when the town is moving to the new,
No,
okay.
I don't think we'll know until right before we move.
Oh, God. Okay. The map, our walking trails map, I asked Ruth Gutman again at Milton Free Library, and she does promise to put it up there soon. We didn't get any more copies made because, again, with the extra water quality testing fee, we didn't end up having extra money, so I didn't ask Jen to make more copies. But we also just found out that copies are a lot cheaper than we thought. What was it, 5 cents or something? Where did that piece of paper go?
5 cents for color and a half a cent for black
And white, yeah.
Wow,
So-
that's reasonable.
So we can get,
He's not charging you for last year.
yeah, so that's great.
I didn't really keep good records of it, but
5 cents color, 25 cents black and white. So I don't have any to hand out. Now, I think this was last time too. Jen King of TPPA asked me if this MCC would consider a steep slopes ordinance, trying to get a steep slopes ordinance for the town of Milton. I think her concern is mostly there are steep slopes around the lakes, and in particular, of course, the project that Three Ponds Investments was looking to do condos on Northeast Pond that had some steep slopes. But of course, there are a lot of places in town that have steep slopes. And a lot of towns, apparently some 20 or 30 of them, have steep slope portions of their zoning ordinance. I don't think Milton has much of anything. I looked through our zoning ordinance, and what I found, the only thing I found about it was in the open space development ordinance that we just helped work on a little bit. It mentions steep slopes in the non-buildable area definition, and in the regular zoning ordinance, there's a definition of developable land, which says the area of the entire tract to be developed, less that classified. So it is developable. Okay, a definition of developable land. The area of the entire tract to be developed, less that classified as very poorly drained, or having slopes exceeding 25% in the Stratford County Soil Survey. So that's where steep slopes come in. And now I asked Bruce, what does this apply to, this developable land definition? And it does not apply to single house lots. It applies to site plans or subdivisions, which is what I suspected. I don't think, there doesn't seem to be a lot that applies to single house lots. And I don't know if, I didn't get to review the model ordinance for steep slopes to see if it suggests it applying to single house lots or not. And even if it did, it probably wouldn't be grandfathered.
No.
It would be only for new purchases. And the same is true, of course, for wetlands. Wetlands are individual house lots are grandfathered if they're already existed, I guess, or if they were already owned before the wetlands ordinance. They can build in the buffer, in other words. But I know when I first read that steep slope model ordinance, I reviewed it briefly, skimmed it. It seemed pretty good. But did anybody else have a chance to look at it at all?
No.
Okay. Does it have any interest in principle to anybody that we would try to?
I think it's a good idea to have one. I wrote one years ago.
Uh-huh.
It did not pass
I see.
the planning board. And my feeling is if we did one, it would only make sense to do it if we were doing it together with Bruce and the planning board.
Oh, of course.
Because otherwise we're just asking for failure.
Right. We would have to work with them, just like we would have to work with them on a wetland type of, if
Right.
we want to.
And they'd have to want it. They
Yeah.
need to want it.
Right, okay. Yep, they have to want it. So far, they were, I have to say, pretty receptive to a lot of our suggestions on the open space ordinance.
Yes.
Not to all of them, but to some of them, they were receptive. So that was a good experience, except for, of course, that they hadn't asked us initially. We sort of jumped in when we saw it was happening. I would like it if we would get in at the beginning on these things. And so actually, I know Bruce Woodruff has already put together a plan or of work tasks for the planning board for the whole of next year. I don't know if we can get in there at all in terms of if we wanted to start talking to them about either steep slopes or wetlands. And it may be that we have to plan essentially 2 years in advance, 2 years out.
If you guys have that meeting, and they approved, the steep slopes ordinance and the wetlands, would that have to go on to the warrant article next year to be added in, like?
Yes, that would have, it would have to have a public hearing,
So
just
what
like
we
the
did.
open space development ordinance had. It would have to have a public hearing and then be put on the ballot in March.
So they started all this stuff in October.
Yeah, and
Just
in fact, it
for
would have to
reference of
start
time.
even sooner because we'd have to sort of discuss what we wanted and I don't know how much space there is in their calendar because I know they already have a lot of tasks.
Well, I can show you our work, I have it,
Okay.
it's in all of our binders.
The trouble is we don't yet know exactly what we want. Now, Mark Jacobs did, as you all signed, he made some great contributions to the open space ordinance. I think a few of the extra definitions and some things. And if we want to work on a wetlands ordinance, and maybe he would even work on a steep slopes ordinance, I don't know. Well, the wetlands ordinance exists. If we want to do any changes to it, those would be much more minor. There is no steep slopes ordinance in Milton, so that would be starting from scratch. Although we have a model ordinance to possibly work from. I don't know if Mark feels qualified to work on a steep slopes ordinance, although as a soil scientist he might, because it does have a lot to do with soils. And he could certainly work on a steep slopes ordinance with us. And I would think we would need to pay him for at least some of that. I mean, what he recently did was free, but In terms of, one thing I wanted to mention is, Steve has said before that a problem with the wetlands ordinance is the enforcement and the lack of teeth. I did notice that, and maybe it was Mark who told me this, or no, it was Kyle Pimental. The wetlands ordinance says you have to restore what you've, disturbed in the wetland. That's all it says for the enforcement. You have to restore it. However, everything in the zoning ordinance is subject to the select board's enforcement. And what it says, at the very beginning of the zoning ordinance, there's a topic called administration and enforcement, and it says the Milton Selectmen or their duly authorized representative, which might be the code enforcer, are hereby designated to administer, implement, and enforce the provisions of this ordinance in accordance with New Hampshire revised statutes annotated. So if somebody doesn't do what they're told to, like restore it, the select board can, I think, come in and enforce, like they could sue the person. I think that's, so it's not, however, again, it's not us, but it was never us who are doing it. We are an advisory board. We are not an enforcing board. So it's always going to be up to the select board or code enforcement. It still would probably be desirable to have more specifications about what fees or what are owed, penalties. But it's not as if there's nothing that can happen if somebody violates the wetlands ordinance. But prevention is still probably the best approach. And certainly it helps the wetland more than enforcement does. So one of the topics for this year that we were thinking of was to reach out to all the landowners who own land next to a wetland and, send them a letter about, you live next to this great natural resource, do you know how valuable it is, what it's good for, how to protect it, and also what the rules are about it, in case you've never noticed the zoning ordinance has these buffers and stuff. Of course, the buffers, the main importance of buffers is when you're talking about a new development. That's where the zoning rules really come in. They don't have a whole lot to do for individual landowners, unless that landowner is really going in and doing a clear cut, which is not allowed in the buffer. And I suppose that could be a reminder to them.
So these are designated wetlands in the town of Milton?
Yes.
It's not like, like say we have property, our 40 acres, nobody's ever said, oh, this is a wetland, but we know it's wet because
That's
we
an
can't
interesting-
cross it in the spring.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Sharon.
I mean, there's
Are
streams
they-
that come down and run into the Salmon Falls all through our 40 acres.
Yeah, and actually, I think the wetlands ordinance, in the zoning ordinance, there's a whole section on wetland protection. And it defines wetlands in it. And I believe it defines wetlands by the soil scientist definition. You have to look at the soils and the vegetation, and it's defined in the New Hampshire statutes.
It's called the New Hampshire method.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do not think that there's a minimum size, and I don't think it has to be named. I think it's just a definition. Now the buffer is not that big, it's 25 feet. Well, it's 50 feet, 25 feet naturally vegetated, 50 feet,
So that's in that big packet you sent us, that whole PDF, so I
Yes.
could look through there to find that.
the zoning ordinance is in there, and the section on wetlands is within it.
Yep.
And it's a good question. I mean, I think we still want to we need to inform ourselves better about it. When does it apply? And Of course, there's nothing about vernal pools, unfortunately, in that. But we could talk about their importance too, and how, and try to help people recognize them. So again, it's, although reminding people that there are regulations and giving a few summaries probably would be important, but just talking more about the benefits, you know, making people want to protect them is a better way. But we do need to understand better what the rules are, and the thing is, there's essentially an exception for timber harvest that you can, as long as you're following best practices, or in other words, following the New Hampshire law, which is that you can't cut more than 50% within, I think, a 50-foot buffer of a wetland. 50%. You can't. You're not supposed to clear cut the whole thing, but I think they're only counting when it's like 200 feet. So if you have a small piece of property and a small amount of wetland, you probably can just cut the whole thing right next to it, because it's not a big enough area to count.
Yeah, I believe our wetlands ordinance has a minimum size of 3,000 square feet.
Ah. Oh, you might be right about that. That it gives it, that there's a definition of what a wetland is, but it also has a minimum size that it applies to. I'd forgotten that. Okay,
Right.
But we should look again. You're right. I mean, I have read it, and no matter how many
Oh,
times
yeah,
I
it's
read it,
hard.
I don't.
And 3,000 square feet isn't all that big.
No,
You
it's not.
It's not tiny, but it's not huge either.
What is it, like 250 by 250, something like that, I think.
Well, 300 by 10,
Oh, so it's more, right, it's not even that big.
right.
Right.
Isn't there like something like 43,000 square feet in an acre?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's, I think, roughly 40,000, I don't remember the exact.
So it's a
number.
lot less than an acre.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
It's tiny.
It's
Ten-
very much
So
smaller.
Less-
it
less
could
than
be
10%.
easily, 10 feet by 300 feet, it could be a stream going through our property.
Right.
10-foot wide stream that keeps changing course.
Yeah.
I'm just, my husband's been using his tractor very happily, going around and moving, with the rocks that we have excess of, and creating bridge, we had an old stone bridge that he restored, and I'm like, how much of this are you supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
Now he wants to get his backhoe out, and I'm like, well, let's figure out what we want the stream to be restored to what it used to be. It got blocked up and
Oh.
blocked by trees down and
Oh.
stuff, so it's kind of spread into.
Well, if it's trees down, that's not
Right, but how much should he manually
right. Right.
fix
No,
the stream bed with
trees
his
down
backhoe?
are okay. Trees down to block a stream, that's a legitimate. I mean, fish like that, so it's not. I mean, in fact, Trout Unlimited puts trees in streams, so it's not something that
Well,
you
the
necessarily want.
landowner doesn't necessarily like it, because that means
I
that
know.
water is all coming into
Right.
where we were gonna
It's
garden.
just like landowners don't like beavers because they dam it up and make it. Yeah, and so there's yes.
Yeah,
So that's
making it nice and also not
Yeah.
affecting it more than we should, that's the question I have.
Yeah.
So I'll look through
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, and one principle about spanning a stream, putting bridges is, if you make sure any bridge goes from the top of the bank to the top of the bank, so you're not down in the channel at all, even the floodplain channel, then you're not disturbing it, then you're safe. If you can stay from the top to the top.
He was restoring what used to be the old cow bridge that the original farmer had crossing the stream. It was huge stones that had sunk, they had dropped in, and he pulled them up and propped them up with new boulders on each side and got them up where they used to be. So that I was good with. But he's got some other ideas.
Well, now we know you have a backhoe.
So, what else should go in a letter if we were gonna write one to landowners about the wetlands they have?
I think what you mentioned is a good start. I don't know that we need much else.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't wanna be too much detail or too overwhelming, or they may not
Yeah, they'll just,
read
they
it.
won't read it.
Right, that's true.
Concise, basic information that are important, the important bullet points that we want to get across without overloading.
Yeah, actually, if our document is just sort of an introduction with a few bullet points, then we can get the DES's pamphlet type stuff and send that along. And we don't have to, although we have to print those, they don't actually give you the printed pamphlets. They give you a PDF, which you then get to print at your
Yeah.
expense. But that's actually at
At
5 cents per copy, who cares?
Or if
That's,
it's black and white.
that had to have cents, but these are I think they are colored.
Yeah,
Yeah, the postage would be a bigger factor actually
yeah,
than
well, that's,
printed.
that, I mean, we did get, I believe, the budget committee approved our budget. Now, of course, whether the town approves the budget will be another question, and so we may be on last year's budget, which actually would be all right, because that's even more money.
More money,
Um,
yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that, I mean, I'm just sort of thinking about this letter, not that it's gonna be finalized, but do we want to have some kind of workshop or something next year sometime that we could invite people to in the letter? 'Cause that would be kind of a nice, like a walk along a wetland, for example.
Mhm.
To,
With
some-
somebody who knew what they were talking about.
Right, I don't know, like Matt Tarr or Rebecca might be willing to come back, or
Or Mark Jacobs.
Mark Jacobs, or maybe Diane knows enough if she, by the way, I told you, right, that she couldn't come tonight because she was going to Boston.
Mhm.
She said to me, she wrote me back, thank you very much for helping me pursue this being getting on the CC. I have to be in Boston today, so I may not be back in time for this meeting, but I'm excited to see it will be on the board agenda. That is, her appointment will be on the board agenda for January 23, the select board. So she still is, in the process of trying to get appointed to the CC. So that's good.
And
we
it
have yet
looks
to
like
see.
she's got experience in this.
Yes,
what
yeah.
we're needing,
See,
so.
I was interested to see she worked for Stony Ridge Environmental, and that's, Stony Ridge is the ones that did the wetland delineation for that 3.04 acre parcel abutting Casey Road. And we've hired them for other things in the past. So that's neat that she worked for them. I hadn't realized that. Yeah, she has a lot of qualifications. I was kind of hoping she'd be here for Joel's presentation tonight, but oh well.
Yeah, the question is, does she have the time?
Right, will she show up? That'll be interesting to see.
I don't know who's going to write this letter, but I bet if you Googled information, you could find a lot online to put something together. In fact, just a couple weeks ago on Science Friday on NPR, they were talking about wetlands, and they said that 40% of all the world's species spend some of their time in wetlands, part of their life cycle. And that, I believe they said 50% of all the world's wetlands have disappeared since 1900, and most of that since 1970. So it's reaching a crescendo.
Oh, any nice little more data like that, or little that you can gather, if you want to write them down for me, that would be great.
Well, you also have the National Wetlands Inventory that's just been put together. Deb and I both sat in, we reported that at our last meeting.
Right.
We didn't
Right.
understand 90% of what she was talking about, all right? But there is a wealth of information out there, all right, that they have, put together that you could probably glean for any kind of letter.
Yeah. But if anybody else wants to do any gleaning and bring it in next time, I'm happy to collate them.
Yeah,
And also, something we'd be looking for, though we may want to do this ourselves, is we'd like to have some photos of our local wetlands. So if we have any, we've done a lot of stewardship walks this year, and we're gonna need to do some more next year, obviously. But we might want to go walk one of these priority wetlands that we've, you know, like number 8, I remember number 8, was part of, what was it called? Oh, what's the name of the stream? It flows into the Salmon Falls up near, it's in Milton Mills.
Oh, the Miller Brook?
Miller Brook. Like, we might want to go look at Miller Brook sometime, just to, you know, get to know it better, because it sounded like it was an important wetland in town.
Is that the one Karen Brown wants to?
Part of it, yeah, once the town owns
Recreation
property
area or
along it.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we can get to it there. It's not that easy, but actually we might want to do it in the winter when it's frozen, because it'd be easier to get around, as long as it's not flowing too fast underneath. So we could think about that next time.
Well, if you want pictures, on Fish Pond, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right, the gentleman, the first house, the only house, the first house on the left, all right, past the wetland, he's a professional photographer, and he told me at one point that, you know, he's got all kinds of pictures of every season of whatever, because I mentioned to him that, you know, we were considering perhaps, all right, designating that as a prime wetland.
Right.
And he said, oh, I'd be very interested in, you know, following that up.
Well, we've
So-
sort of
so-
given up on the prime, but we still could designate it as, in town, as a more important wetland. I mean, that's right, I'd forgotten about that part, that's another thing we can, instead of working on the enforcement end, we could work on the more important wetlands and designate a few of them with greater buffers, for example. And that one would be one of those. We had 4, I think we came up with it. Number 8, Miller Brook was another one.
Yep.
Fish Pond, I can't remember the other 2, but
Yeah,
I could look it up, I have that.
Yep.
That's true. So again, but we have to work with the planning board on that, and so we'd have to put together something to present to them, but not spend so much time that if they turn it down, we feel like we've wasted our lives on it. Yeah. But if he has any neat photographs of that, that would be neat.
Okay.
And even for like a presentation to the planning board, to
And
show.
why would they turn it down? I mean, you're making a recommendation to just designate them as significant wetlands.
Well, because I would like to see a significant wetland have a greater buffer than just the ordinary wetlands, or,
And
or-
they don't wanna, is that a hardship for them to do that? I mean, is it cost them
well, of course,
money?
it's a public hearing, and it would have to go on the town
Article or
warrant.
something?
But the hardship is perceived if, it prevents development, which we wanna do, but there are people in town who think we need more development and don't wanna put any more obstacles in the way. So that's where the
Balance,
thing is.
basically. Okay.
It's the question about how much obstacles we're putting to development. At least that's what I see as the
No,
prime.
you're right.
Okay,
Development's gonna come, we can only mitigate it.
yeah, so,
There's 1,000 new residential units coming on in Dover in the coming year. And I know
Uh-huh.
there's hundreds more in Rochester.
uh-huh.
It's gonna put a lot of pressure.
So there's gonna be pressure. They said, well, yeah, so we should come back to that, that question. Somehow it had gotten off my radar, and I'm glad you brought it up. Let's talk about it again next time.
Okay.
How to proceed with the planning board and asking if they have interest in a increased buffer. Probably the first thing would be to bring it up to Bruce. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
And I may be overly pessimistic. It's possible that they, you know, Sharon, it's a good question. Why would they stop? It's not as if it's, well, it would be more work. It would be another public hearing and another, something. But we could help a lot with the language, not rely on them. Okay, well, we've, should wrap it up. Anybody have any other business before we do?
No.
Okay, does somebody wanna move to adjourn? A reminder of our next meeting, I think it's February, what is, I have it on here. 4th, the 1st, February 1st. Okay. Okay,
I'll move to adjourn.
A second.
all in favor? Okay. I bet that was a lot to take notes on, Jen.
He loves it.
Thank you, everybody.
Hey, Bob, let me know what time.